Thank you, Christina. I'm really happy to be here to present information about the ACAD study, the Asian cohort for Alzheimer's disease. It is clearly a team effort, so I will be referring to other people as we go. And let's see, speaking of that, I wanted to, in particular, identify Anna Liu and Dr. Howard Feldman, because they have contributed a lot to this PowerPoint. And I didn't want to take credit for it myself because it's really been a team effort. I don't know what that's about. Anyway, so our UCSD team, we mentioned Dr. Feldman and Anna Liu. We have several other members, Dr. Feldman, Anna, and Carolyn Revta are all from the ADCS. And so the ADCS is actually playing a big part in this project at our site. We have Dr. Kai Nguyen, who is an internist actually at UCSD and a gerontologist. And he is quite interested in this study and is helping us out, and I'll refer back to him a little bit later. So two students that I was talking about earlier, one is Lucy Vo and the other Perry Nam. Lucy is an upcoming senior at UCSD, and Perry is just about to start his first year of medical school. Both of them have been extremely helpful. Lucy's going to have a lot of participant contact, and Perry may have some as well. He started with us just this summer. Let's see. No, wrong way. Okay, so just a little bit about ACAD as an introduction. It's an international collaboration to study the impact of lifestyle and genetic factors on Alzheimer's disease risk. So there are 8 sites. There's 6 in the US and 2 in Canada. It is the first large cohort to examine genetic and non-genetic risk factors for AD among Asian Americans and Canadians. So the National Institute of Aging has funded an R56 grant to conduct a multi-site pilot feasibility study. So it's our first step towards a larger study. We've been working together for several years now. I can't remember exactly when we started, but it's been a while. The University of Pennsylvania is the coordinating center, and Dr. Lisan Wang at UPenn is the principal investigator. Dr. Feldman and Dr. Wang have been very hands-on, which has just made it even a better project. So I just wanted to mention that before we go into the reasons that we want to do this Asian study, that it really is hard evidence that genetic risk factors differ among ethnic groups. I think it's easy for us all to just assume that the risk factors are the same for all people, but we're finding out that that's not true. And so that's one of the big reasons that we want to do this Asian study. So these particular studies, one of them is from our group. The details are not that important, but the findings just illustrate that point that the risk factors differ. Let's see, forward. So the rationale for ACAD as we were noting, it is important to identify risk factors and other aspects of lifestyle through research in large sections of the population. Asians make up 6 and 10% of the US and Canadian populations, respectively, and they are the fastest growing populations in both countries. As in Latinos, the Asians are underrepresented in AD research. It's actually quite striking. Clinical research projects on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders comprised only 0.17% of the total budget for the NIH between 1992 and 2018. And if you took out the Pacific Islanders, it would be even lower for Asian Americans. So ACAD basically is designed to address this failure to include Asian older adults in AD research, and also to identify genetic and lifestyle risk factors in this population. We have a very nice website at this point. It's acadstudy.org if anybody wants to check that out. These are the requirements for the participants. One is that they need to be of Asian ancestry, and I'll say a little bit more about what aspects of Asian ancestry. They need to be 60 years of age or older. They will be either cognitively intact or cognitively impaired. You know, that makes sense because we want to understand the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And I'll say more about how we will diagnose people in a minute. The participants will either speak English or they'll speak Chinese, Korean, or Vietnamese, and that will depend on the site. The ACAD organization is divided into work groups. So we have clinical work group, an outreach recruitment work group, a data management, a training work group, and then biomarker and analysis are not so active at this point, but those first 4 have done a lot of work to plan the study. We will be getting support from a number of different areas. Of course, the UPenn Coordinating Center. Also, NCRAD will be helping us with sample management. The ADGC with genetic identification. NIAGADS for data sharing for genetic information. And our own National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center that we're so familiar with, we will identify phenotypes from using that organization. It's a little bit hard to see these, so I have another slide that will explain more, but this is just a flow chart of the actual participant parts. It starts out with pre-screening, which Anna will do, and she will also be obtaining the consent. There are 3 clinical parts, A, B, and C, and I'll tell you more about those. But I wanted to mention the consensus. That's where we will take all the information that we have and try to understand what diagnosis would be best. That will be in a conference. The 2 main players will be Dr. Feldman as a neurologist and me as the neuropsychologist, but we will also get help from other team members that have had some participant contact and you know, can probably give us ideas and information that might not just be in scores or on paper. Then data entry, when we start, that will be through REDCap. So pre-screening will be demographics, but we're really emphasizing the fact that the pre-screening will be, that one of the main goals of the pre-screening will be to build trust. So really listening to the person, answering any questions they have, explaining, what they can expect, that type of thing. We will mail out the consent in advance so that if someone wants to read it over, they can. But we will also meet with them to review it, probably just point out some main points of the consent and answer any questions that they have, and give them as much time as they need to ask questions. Part A includes demographics, again, in the CDR, or the major portions of the CDR. Part B is an interesting self-administered questionnaire about lifestyle factors. And this particular questionnaire was identified by the clinical work group. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So part C will be medical history and medications. It will be the neurological exam, but it'll also be the neuropsychological testing, the geriatric depression scale, and sample collection. In our site, we are getting saliva, and that will be analyzed for DNA. Some of the other sites will be getting blood, and that may be in our future as a site, but not at this point. All right, this is that part B that I was talking about, the questionnaire. I just want to give you an idea. The questions ask you, this is what you would say to the participant. The questions ask you to reflect on activities during childhood and young adulthood. And we explained to them that the reason that we're doing this is because some research has shown that there are connections between these activities and health in late life. So these are primarily enrichment type things that are focused on. We asked them when they were age 6, age 12, and age 18, a variety of questions to understand what their life was like at the time. For some of these people, perhaps they were in Vietnam and some of them were already here. But it focuses on things like music lessons, reading, access to books, whether they had a library card, whether they visited museums or attended musical concerts, reading newspapers, magazines, playing games, physical activities, writing letters. So there's a whole host of activities that we ask people about. I think it probably will yield some interesting results to try to understand, whether that does have an effect on whether someone goes on to get Alzheimer's disease or even cognitive problems. So I wanted to tell you about the cognitive assessment, which is in part C. The first is the Common Objects Memory Test. It's a little bit similar to some of our other memory tests in that it has learning trials, short delay-free and long delay-free recognition. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. We're also going to give the CASI, the Cognitive Ability Screening Instrument, which is similar. We spent a fair amount of time trying to decide on which test to give. And, there's always that balance between it taking too long and getting as much information as we can. For category fluency, we are asking for 4-legged animals. And the reason for 4-legged animals instead of just animals is that the CASI asked for 4-legged animals. So we will just, the CASI asked for 30 seconds. We'll just extend that to 60 seconds and mark it for both, but we'll keep the 4-legged animals category. Also, we'll be asking about vegetables. And there is some data on some of these Asian groups on category fluency. We will also ask for them to draw a clock to command. Another limitation in trying to decide on the cognitive assessment was the pandemic. We had to decide on things that we could do virtually, and that's what we'll be doing. We have no plans to see them in person, at least right away. Hopefully in the long run, we'll be able to do that, and we might be able to expand what we ask them to do at that point. So going back to the Common Objects Memory Test, there's this paper by Kempler et al. And that group of authors is mostly from UC Irvine and UCLA. They have done some work on Asian populations. So a while back, they decided to develop this test. And the idea was to be able to use it with people with a range of educational, language, and cultural backgrounds. So there are 10 color photographs. You can see this is just an example up here. They're pretty nice photographs. They picked pictures that would be familiar across these cultures, and that would make it a bit unique compared to some of the other kinds of memory tests that we give. Yeah, bottom line, that's visual representations can help to bypass difficulties posed by problems with translation or participants who may have very limited education. Also, there are a lot of older folks that have hearing problems, and this is another way that they can their memory can be tested without that being too much of a limitation. So this was actually a study with 5 different groups. This Kempler et al. Article. They included African Americans, Chinese, Vietnamese, Caucasian, and Hispanics. Their findings were that the performance was influenced by age, very little by education, and not by gender or ethnicity. So those are interesting findings. They administered a number of neuropsychological tests and compared them, and the comp recall scores best distinguish the healthy individuals from patients with dementia, which is going to be really important for us trying to understand trying to divide into groups of cognitively impaired versus normal controls. So kind of switching back to the study there and how it's organized, there are 8 sites in the US and Canada. UCSD will be the only site that it will be focused on Vietnamese. And for the pilot study, we will only be meeting with Vietnamese, although in the future we may expand to other Asian groups. UMass Boston will be addressing Korean participants. And then there are 6 sites that will be assessing Chinese participants. So those are University of British Columbia, University of Toronto, the 2 Canadian sites, UCSF, Stanford, Columbia, and USC. So I really like for people to see maps, and I like to look at maps myself, and I think it is kind of helpful to see these other parts of the world that are pretty far away from us, where people had ancestry, or maybe they lived there at one point. So let's see, you can see my pointer, right? Yeah, okay. So this is Vietnam right here, and then China here, and then Korea up here. it's another whole story of how we decided on those three groups, but maybe for another time we can talk about that. Although in the future, we would like to expand to other Asian groups. So you can see that Vietnam is bordered by China, Laos, and Cambodia, and very close to Thailand. Here's a closer up map of Vietnam. Hanoi is up in the northern part. These are cities that most people would have heard of. And Saigon, later named Ho Chi Minh City, is in the southern part. There really is a pretty distinctive, even geographical divide between the north and the south. So I wanted to talk about the history of Vietnam, which is a little different for our lunch and learn presentations, but I think it's really interesting to give this some context. And I wanted to mention that our team member at UCSD, Lucy Vo, her father is here in San Diego. He's an engineer, and he is kind of a history buff. So I went through various kinds of information sources to try to figure out some of the highlights of the Vietnamese history, sort of their more modern highlights. And it was wonderful because I asked Lucy to ask her father to go over what I had said and try to either correct things or add to things, or and he was more than happy to do that. So we really appreciate that effort from him. Starting back in 1862 through 1945, the French controlled Vietnam. It was called French Indochina, and it included Laos and Cambodia as well as Vietnam. And Hanoi, in the northern part of Vietnam, was the capital. And around 1930, Ho Chi Minh formed an Indochinese Communist Party to oppose colonial rule. So this is the French colonial rule. So that was a big event. From 1940 to 45, the Japanese invaded Vietnam, or that whole area, and dominated the region. In 1945, the Japanese surrendered to the World War II allies and left Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh at that point was still a powerful person, declared Vietnam independent, and established a government in the north. The US and Britain at that point supported the French return, which is interesting, and I think kind of led up to some of the future events. In 1954, Vietnam was divided into North and South. I think that was after Ho Chi Minh tried to unite the whole country, but it divided into North and South. Ho Chi Minh remained in control of the North. The men troops, and I understand that word "men" does not come from Ho Chi Minh, but it's a group that defeated the French in a small mountain outpost on the Vietnamese border with Laos. In 1955, the South Vietnamese invited US advisors for support. And it's not clear to me what happened between 1955 and 1964, when the first US troops, who were Marines, arrived in Vietnam. I think I need to have another conversation with Lucy's dad to try to understand that better. In 1965, the full force of the US military was there. And then the war that ensued was called the Second Indochina War. I think a lot of you that have followed any of this history at all probably have heard of the Tet Offensive in 1968. The North Vietnamese orchestrated an attack on South Vietnamese cities. There were significant casualties and fatalities. I'm sure that there was already public opinion that was against, in the US, that was against the war, but this turned that opinion even more so. In 1975, the US left Vietnam after a lot of loss of life and casualties on all sides. At that point, the North took control of the South to try to unify Vietnam, and the name of Saigon, which was the main city in the South, was changed to Ho Chi Minh City. So these events really were predicted immigration into into a lot of places, but into the US. And in April of 1975, which was when Saigon fell, over 125,000 Vietnamese refugees evacuated, not necessarily to the US, but to a number of places. Between 1975 and 2000, the immigrant population in the US grew significantly and increased 100% every decade from 1980 to 2000. In the 2000s, the estimate is 26% increase in the Vietnamese immigrant population. So then jumping to more recently, 1.3 million Vietnamese immigrants were in the United States. 3% of all of the immigrants in the United States were Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese were the 6th largest foreign-born group in the country. So you can see that it's quite sizable, and I believe continues to grow. In 2018, there was a United States Census Bureau survey, 2.2 million Vietnamese residents in the United States at that point, which is another big jump. And the Vietnamese were the largest of the Asian Pacific Islander population in the US. This is just a similar graph. You can see that the Korean and Chinese individuals started immigrating to the US back in 1960. Here, and the Vietnamese, it was more around 1975, 1980. The trajectories for all of these is in an upward direction. Not clear whether the Koreans are leveling off, but it looks that the Chinese and the Vietnamese are continuing to grow. This just talks about the specific numbers from that US Census Bureau survey in 2018. And over 5 million Chinese Asians in the United States, Chinese in the United States, whoops. 4.5 million Asian Indians, 4 million Filipinos, and Vietnamese is in 4th place at 2.2 million. So this was 2018. Wanted to let you know where the Vietnamese have tended to settle in the United States. There are 3 very large areas. One is Orange County, just up the road from us, and San Jose in Northern California, but also in Houston, Texas. I believe that Orange County has the largest population of Vietnamese Americans. You can see that there are a lot of other places as well. They just, the size of the populations just aren't quite as large. Switching back to our study, We, particularly Anna Lou gets credit for this, organized a citizen advisory group. And we have a variety of people in that group, very helpful to us. We've met on a pretty regular basis. I just wanted to note that the group is facilitated by Dr. Kai Nguyen, and I explained before that he is a UCSD physician, gerontologist, and has been extremely helpful to us. He speaks fluent Vietnamese, as do several of our other members. Anna and Perry and Lucy also speak fluent Vietnamese, which is wonderful. This particular advisory group has a number of mandates. Hopefully they want to really be aware of the needs and the interest of the Vietnamese community so that they can communicate with us that might not be quite as aware of some things. They have helped tremendously with translating materials into Vietnamese, which I'll say a little bit more about later. And they have provided some input and resources that have helped us with recruitment efforts. We have not actually started. None of the sites have actually had, well, maybe one for consent has had participant contact, but that is just getting started. But again, Anna has done a wonderful job of having a whole list of people who are, willing to participate in the study. So an initial phase of our study, developing outreach and training materials, translating outreach and materials and cognitive assessments, initiating the citizen advisory group that we just talked about. Building community partnerships is a really important one. And we spoke about recruiting Vietnamese American participants. And our goal is to get 25. We may get more than that. I think it's a reasonable goal for the pilot's feasibility study. We don't need to go through all of these, but I think, these are initiatives that have been initiated and really sustained by the ADRC or Core. Have to particularly call out Christina and Emily and Tracy. Hopefully all of you kind of are familiar with them. And a lot of these efforts have been focused on Latino recruitments. The amount of work that goes into it is unbelievable. But we do have experience with that, and we're calling on the ADRC experiences and these types of activities to try to learn what kinds of activities we might use with the Vietnamese. So these are some materials that have been translated into Vietnamese. The outreach group for ACAD, and Anna is an important member of that group. The outreach group has done a great job, not only getting information across, but making it look very nice and appealing to people that might see it. So in addition to some of these written materials, there is an animated video, and that's pretty amazing. If you, I believe it's on the website for ACAD if you want to take a look, and the PowerPoint presentation that introduces the study. So quite a bit of effort has gone into planned community engagement. And these that I'm listing here are local. They're from the ones that we have talked about in our site and have pursued. Anna is part of a organizing committee for a conference that will be addressing diverse groups in research on November 6th. I hope that a lot of people will tune into that. There's an emphasis on Asian outreach. We're also planning community lectures in English and Vietnamese in the community and on Zoom. And these might address things like, what is Alzheimer's disease? Trying to destigmatize Alzheimer's disease. I think there's a feeling that Alzheimer's disease is a bit more stigmatized in the Asian community, maybe than it is in the wider population. We want to understand why research, we want them to understand why we feel research is so important, or why their inclusion in research is so important. Also something about the scientific method, so that some of these things that we're doing will make more sense to them. Locations that we've identified so far are churches and temples, as well as community centers. These are some of the community partners. Because Orange County has such a large Vietnamese population, we have really concentrated to some extent on those, but there are a number in our community as well. We must say that these community partners have been very enthusiastic about this study, and really work hard to try to help us reach our goals. Dr. Feldman and Anna organized a road trip up to Orange County, which was really fun. This was kind of early on, but we learned a lot about the organizations in that area that might be able to help us recruit, and at some point may help out with the actual assessments for people in their area, particularly when in-person visits are allowed. I wanted to just touch on issues of translation. This is a slide that Anna put together with the Vietnamese translations of some of the vocabulary that we use when we're learning about Alzheimer's. So memory loss, disorientation, language difficulties. When we talk to, these are some of the things that we will address when we talk to people about what Alzheimer's actually involves. But I think that we've learned that some of the words in English don't necessarily mean the same thing when translated into Vietnamese, don't necessarily mean the same thing that we think that they mean. So dementia might be an example of that. If we just use the word dementia haphazardly, then some people will hear that as craziness. And we were warned about that when we went up to Orange County, that we should be very careful about what we say, what we put on recruitment flyers, etc. So again, Anna put this slide together about the Vietnamese language. I think it's really important. I think it's really interesting in trying to understand it, because of course it's very different from English. So the Vietnamese population from north to south share the same cultural heritage and speak and write the same language, with some variations more in accents than anything else. And we were thinking that that's really important to note, because it would be easy to think, well, the language is different in the north than it is in the south, and that's not true, or it evolved differently. Vietnamese language was historically written in a mixture of Chinese characters and locally invented Chinese-based script. And about 60% of modern Vietnamese words are of Chinese origin. The French colonial rule, when they were in Vietnam, led to official adoption of the Vietnamese alphabet. So that is based on Latin script. It's the romanization of the alphabet. So it's the same letters that we use in our 26-letter alphabet. There are some differences that would certainly make it impossible for me to learn Vietnamese, but they have the tonality is very important, and the tonality had some origins in the Thai language. So in Vietnamese, each syllable has one of 6 tones, which can completely alter the meaning of the word. So how you say it indicates what you are trying to communicate. So I'm pretty much at the end of the presentation, but we've got 4 abstracts that were accepted for the AAIC this month on ACAD. And I didn't list them here, but in one of them who's the lead author is Dr. Lee-San Wang, the overall PI. He identified a few things that we might address in the future, things that we might learn from this ACAD pilot feasibility study, or even a larger study that we all intend to see through in the future. This may allow us to identify some novel therapeutic pathways for AD, to explore additional risk factors. We're exploring some at this point, but there will be many more. And the extension of ACAD to other Asian groups is a hope. And that might include South Asians, Filipinos, and Japanese. There are other groups as well. So we'll see how that goes.
We have 1 minute left. There's a lot of people putting in the chat messages of gratitude and complimentary remarks regarding what a good presentation it was. And I definitely want to echo those sentiments. So thank you so much. We're really excited for this initiative and that it's happening right here. And thank you for sharing about it. We'll look forward to hearing once you have some data, you can come back and tell us more about it.
Thank you.
Great job, Guerry.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.